Hello, this is it. This is the last one. I was going to break this one into a kind of smaller chunks, but to be honest, um, there's not really kind of really segmented kind of section away, kind of at a halfway point, and it's only 7 pages anyway, so I'm going to do it all in one. So it may be a bit of a longer one, but it does kind of encapsulate the entire stave. Dickens sums it up for us as well. Look, the end of it. Doesn't say the end of the terror, the end of the emotional trauma, the end of it. So Dickens starts off with this exclamatory look. Just a simple yes. And as well, graphologically, if you remember kind of all the way through this, we've seen a pattern from Dickens of graphological ways of expressing certain things. And he's doing it here. Just yes, that feeling of elation, of relief, basically, that all of that he saw was not the end, that this is something that can change and that he will change. I think it's almost kind of microcosmic of all the kind of grief he's gone through and the stress he's gone through and the distress that he's gone through. And now that it's over, he can change it. He can sort it out. He can do something about it. It wasn't a final kind of outcome that can't be changed. It was something that is a glimpse into the future if change doesn't occur. Now then we go into the first kind of couple of lines and we get this repetition of his own. Okay? So all the way through this first one, we get the bed was his own. The room was his own. Time before him was his own. There's this kind of idea of ownership, okay? And the idea of ownership of his own fate. That actually, I'm the one that's got control over this. I'm the one who can change my fate. I can decide how to live my life in terms of being kind, generous, and charitable. Because those are basically the three things that Dickens is trying to teach us as an audience. Now, as we move down, we see that he's still very, very emotive from the previous stave. So it says, look, he had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. So he's literally just come out. He's not falling asleep and gone to sleep for a couple of hours and calmed down. This is immediately after. The phantom shrinks into the floor, and suddenly this is it. It's immediate. There is no pause in time. So his face is still wet with the tears because he's been sobbing violently. Yeah, think about how that absolute hyperbole of emotion there. He's been so conflicted with the ideas of these spirits that his entire face is an ocean, basically. That he is so overcome with emotion that he couldn't help but sob violently. And it shows how much it affected him. And if we think back to external heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge, we're now seeing that external things and external influences do have an effect on him and have and are changing him. So he's changed. We're getting proof throughout the stave and at a constant rate as well. So then we see a bunch of similes. Light as a feather, happy as an angel, merry as a schoolboy, giddy as a drunken man. If you remember how Dickens had described Scrooge in stave 1 using simile, these are very, very juxtapositional, okay? His character development is kind of complete almost, yeah? It used to be that it was hard and sharp as flint, and he was as solitary as an oyster. Yeah, something tough, something immovable, something stubborn, also something alone, something isolated. And now he's been compared to a feather. He's light. He's been compared to an angel. Remember all the kind of Christian and religious symbols we've had all the way through this. As merry as a schoolboy, giddy as a drunken man. Yeah, so all these positive things are slowly outweighing all the horrible stuff from stave 1. We also get similar language that we saw in stave 2 with the Ghost of Christmas Past as well. The kind of hello, whoop, halloo, yeah? These onomatopoeic kind of exclamations of joy that we're seeing from Scrooge. So then he starts kind of piecing it together that, there's the door where the Ghost of Christmas present was, or past, or Marley, or wherever. Again, it's obviously very soon after it's happened, so he's kind of going, oh my god, that's where that lesson was. It's almost as if his surroundings are going to be a constant reminder for him of the lessons that he's learned, which is exactly what he needs. He needs to be constantly reminded. So then we see this quote here, look, it's all right, it's all true, it all happened. People often read this and think, well, it was all just a dream, it was all, it wasn't real, it never actually happened, it was all in his head, it was hallucination, whatever. Whereas Dickens is saying, no, it's true, it all actually happened. And there's kind of this suspension of belief almost that, this is not a physics book about entropy and time. This is not meant to be a a non-fiction book that's all factual. It's meant to be about how experience can change you. We're seeing the use of the repetition of the term. Look, it's all right, all true, all happened. Okay? And again, there's this reference to the impersonal pronoun it. Yeah? And we're seeing that here. That it kind of, Scrooge is going to know it as it from now on. And maybe we should too as well, because again, we're meant to learn from this, not just Scrooge. I'm kind of glad I'm never going to have to say that sentence again, because this book will be done. Interesting. Now we hear a load of bells ringing, so we get a lot of onomatopoeia, clash, clang, hammer, ding, dong, bell. And he's just pleased to kind of be there. He's pleased to be in the moment and to be alive. Then we see, again, a juxtaposition between Stave 1 and Stave 5. Nearly said 7 then. That's not a number. Well, it is a number, but it's not Stave. It talks about no fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold, cold, piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. So a long asyndetic list there of almost kind of the sensory stuff that's going on, yeah? The sweet fresh air, this kind of smell or taste that you can have. You can hear the bells, you can't feel the fog, it's clear, it's bright, you can feel the cold of the Christmas day. It's going to be cold, but it's no longer kind of a foggy, cold, dark, everything's horrible, pathetic fallacy. Yeah, we're seeing golden sunlight, heavenly sky. So now the pathetic fallacy has shifted from one end to the other extreme now. Now, he then looks out the window and asks just someone passing, what day is today? And the boy says, Christmas Day. Now look, Dickens has done the classic graphology thing there, of just pointing out. The kid isn't going, why Christmas Day? It's not kind of a shouted thing. It's it's a graphological thing for us as readers to know what's going on here. If this was a play, there might be some stage directions there to tell us that this is an important part, the way the actor should do it, or they should move to a different part of the stage, etc., etc. But Dickens is doing it as a novella, so it needs to be graphological, it needs to be on the page. So Christmas Day. So we're reminded, he hasn't screwed it up yet. He's still got time to change. This isn't the future where he's dead and no one cares about him. Now, Scrooge asks the boy to go and get a prize turkey, so a huge turkey that he's seeing in one of the windows of a butcher shop. And he says, go and buy it, tell him to bring it here, and I may even give him direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. One of the biggest kind of microcosms we've got. He is a tight-fisted old sinner from the first Stave. Yeah, he's covetous. He is obsessed with money. He worships gold as an idol. He lost love over it. He's lost everything over money. And now he's asking a kid to go and fetch something for him. And he says, I'll give you a shilling. Now, bear in mind, a shilling is not a huge amount of money. In today, it's probably a couple of quid. But it's still, in a poverty-stricken place, just to say to someone, oh, could you go down the road, fetch me this thing, and I'll give you a shilling. It's a nice thing for him to do. It's a starting point. I will give you a shilling. That all, yeah? The contracting, I will. And will, obviously, is a modal verb of obligation, that I will give you a shilling. So we find out what the plan is. So the plan is to send it to Bob Cratchit's house. He doesn't say, tell him from Scrooge. He just says, send the turkey to Bob Cratchit's house. In this Stave, they don't go to he doesn't go to Bob Cratchit's house during Christmas Day. He saves it for the day after, and we'll see why that is in a second. If you know the story, you know kind of what he tries to do. But he doesn't actually go to Bob Cratchit's house. He sends the turkey. He can't wait for the size of the joke. Yeah, he says he shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. And then he references a comedian, a kind of actor that was famous for doing comedy at the time, Joe Miller. Never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be. So he's spontaneously, but he's got this plan in his head. So he spontaneously thought of this great little trick that he can kind of pull and also be kind and generous and charitable. And again, we're getting another reference here to the kind of the journey that he's been on. So he notices the knocker. The knocker caught his eye. Now remember, that's what started all of it. The knocker literally became Marley's face, if you remember, in Stave 1. And he's looking at it and he remembers. That's going to be a reminder every day. And he's going to love that knocker because that is the first thing that kind of started his journey on the journey of change. Now, then we get another bit of graphological kind of example from Dickens. And it's kind of in the syntactical style, if you remember, of Stave 3 in the Ghost of Christmas Present, it talks about, oh, it was such a goose, and such was in italics. Okay? And this time, we get the was. It is in italics. Yeah? It was a turkey. Really, whoa, look at this thing. So if the Cratchits were happy with this kind of little goose, then this huge turkey, oh my life, they're going to love it. So he pays the boy, and he pays for the boy to go in a cab with the turkey, because the turkey's so huge that the boy won't be able to kind of hold it without, shaking, and he might drop it and stuff. So he says, you know what, I'll pay for a taxi as well. So again, we're seeing that generosity in terms of the money coming out as well. He shaves, and we keep getting references to the idea of the trembling hands. So up here, look, we get the idea that he writes the address, and he hasn't got a steady hand. His hand is shaking. And then down here, shaving was not easy because his hand was shaking. And, this may be a reference to Stave 4, if you remember, from the hand shaking at the very end, when Scrooge started to change his ways, and that the ghost was aware of it, or it was feeling pity for him. So we're seeing kind of an imagery reference there. So he gets dressed, and he goes into the streets, and again, we're getting kind of more confirmation that this really happened, this whole thing for Scrooge. And it says that people were pouring forth as he had seen with the Ghost of Christmas Present. So he's seen the exact same scenario that he saw not long before with the Ghost of Christmas Present going out before him. So again, it's kind of confirmed to him that this is real. You really experienced that thing, and that actually happened, that you were here not long ago, through kind of the magic of the ghosts and the supernatural abilities. And we get, again, another changed look. Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. Now think about how that juxtaposes. We had the guide dogs kind of making people avoid Scrooge in the street in Stave 1, and now he's regarding everyone with a delighted smile. He's actively trying. He's not just kind of not being horrible to people. He's actively being nicer and kinder and more generous and more charitable. Smile is kind of a window to a whole bunch of emotions. It's a simple thing that just smiling at someone can make you and them feel better. And that's what he's doing. He's looking at people with a delighted smile. Even though he hasn't gone around and said, hello, I'm a changed man, he's just starting to do it. Because he's not looking for recognition, he's just looking to be nice, kind, generous. And we even get kind of the reiteration of that look. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humoured fellows said, good morning, sir, and Merry Christmas to you. So, despite everyone avoiding him usually, 3 or 4 people couldn't even help because he looked so happy and so kind of inviting, but they actually replied. Yeah, it works. Being nice works. We then see that Scrooge happens to kind of cross the paths of the charitable gentleman from the first Stave, who came in and, said, oh, Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, and how much do we write you down for? And this is when Scrooge said, I wish to be left alone. And, are there no workhouses? If they would rather die, then they'd better do it. And all these kind of horrible phrases. If you remember, he said, oh, there was a charity worker, I would have liked to have gifted him something. And he also talks about the caroller as well. And he's got his first opportunity to kind of redeem himself fully. So this is when he whispers in his ear. Now, if you remember, previously, when we've had the ghosts and Scrooge in the same stave, we have seen that kind of structurally, whoever's word is more important is directly quoted, and then the other is just kind of reported. Scrooge says something along these lines, and then it directly quotes the ghost, or vice versa. Okay? Now, at this point, the speech actually stops just before we find out how much he whispers in the ear that he wants to give the charity worker. Okay? The amount isn't important. It's the act. It doesn't matter how much he's giving. That's not what we should be happy about for Scrooge, or happy about with ourselves. It's just that he is doing it. He is actively trying to help other people. And yeah, he can whisper in his ear, and it talks about a great many back payments are included in it. So we can assume it's going to be a lot of money. And obviously Scrooge has the means to do that. But Dickens doesn't say, oh, he gives him, £50, which is, a lot of money nowadays in kind of inflation terms. But he doesn't give an exact figure. He just says he whispers in the ear, and then there's an implication that it's a lot of money. But the amount is not important. It's the act that's important. Okay, remember, it's a moral story, and we're learning. Down the page a bit, Scrooge says, I am much obliged to you. So, as in kind of, I owe you a lot. Now, he's not talking about that one individual person. He is, but there's an implication that this person he means is obliged to you as a charity person, not kind of you as, Bob the Builder or whatever his name is. But he is obliged to charity. It's kind of as if this person is a personification of charity. That anytime someone like this who represents or symbolizes charity or goodwill, he should try and help them in any way he can. And he's much obliged to them. Yeah? So it even intensifies it a bit more. I'm not just obliged to you, I'm much obliged to you. The pronoun is more kind of abstract than it makes out on the page. Now as we go down, it says, he had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. He is happy. He's contented. Yeah? A lot of the kind of, film or TV interpretations of this have him dancing and singing in the streets and jumping around. Wouldn't surprise me. But in the term of the language, he's had so much happiness that he is just overjoyed with it. And that he's realizing it's a two-way street, that if I'm good to you, I feel good as well. And I'm sure you felt the same way. You kind of given to charity, or you've done something important for someone. It feels good to be good. So he goes to Fred's, and we see a humble Scrooge. He goes on and he says, "I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Yeah? Think about how symbolic that is, that he's asking permission now. Will you let me in? He's not barging in saying, I'm here, I'm going to save myself. He's being kind of proper about it and thinking, actually, no, I do need to ask. Because if they're not ready to have me yet, I shouldn't be in. And think what this says about Fred. Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Fred, after all these years, forgives him like that. There's no pause in his mind. He just lets him in and he lets him do his thing. Oh, of course you can come in. Even though he knows how awful he's been. Yeah? Now, if you remember, in Stave 4, there was the part where the Cratchits were talking about... Well, Bob Cratchit was talking about seeing Fred in the streets, and that Fred was kind of a little bit down. We could even read into that now, retrospectively, that actually he always knew that Scrooge had a chance and he wished he did. That any opportunity Scrooge gave to change his ways and be nicer and be kinder to people, he would let him in with open arms. And we're seeing it in black and white here. Look, let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. So Fred comes out, shaking his hand really violently, as if he's so pleased to see him. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Yeah? So it's kind of a reference to superlative there, even if it's actually a comparative. But nothing could be heartier. Yeah? There's nothing more hearty than the scene that we've just seen. So we see that Dickens and or Scrooge describe it as a wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity. Wonderful unanimity. There we go. And also wonderful happiness, kind of the syllables. And there's just the constant reiteration that everything was wonderful, everything was great. Why didn't you do this earlier? Why was he such a git before that he didn't want to do anything like that? He should have listened, he should have changed earlier. Look what he's been missing. So, then, he talks about how he wanted to get to the office early the next morning. So the next morning, Boxing Day, he wants to get there really early and try and catch Bob being a bit late. Because he wants Bob to be a little late, because he's got this kind of little plan in his head that he wants to kind of play out. And he says that Bob was late. It became 9 o'clock and no Bob. 15:15, no Bob. And he says it was a full 18 minutes and a half behind before he turned up. So he comes in, runs to his stool, and tries to get his work done as soon as possible, and kind of scurrying away with the pen or the quill. Scrooge is playing his game. So he's pretending to be classic Scrooge. "Hello," growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice. Yeah? As near as he could feign it. So he almost doesn't have the ability to be horrible anymore, but he tries to act as horrible as he can. And plays this whole thing, and then he says, "Now I tell you what, my friend," says Scrooge, "I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, and therefore..." And then it says, he continued, leaping from his stool, giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again. "And therefore I'm about to raise your salary." So he tricks him. Yeah, he jumps up and kind of pretends that he's going to be horrible, and then kind of goes, "I'm about to raise your salary." Bob doesn't really get what's going on. He trembles, and he says he had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with the ruler, holding him, and calling people in the court to call for a straight waistcoat. It's like a straight jacket for kind of people who weren't kind of safe to be around. As if that he feels like Scrooge has lost his mind. What are you talking about? Something's wrong with you. You should be sent to the asylum. And he says, a Merry Christmas, Bob. So they discuss, and it implies that he's about to help the Cratchits as much as he can, by raising his salary and discussing his affairs. So kind of, how is everything going? Is there anything I can help with? We see kind of a plot device and a narrative resolution here. Tiny Tim, who did not die. So again, we've got that graphological element there, that it's in capitals. We needed that as an audience, I think. That we didn't want any questions about things that were seen earlier on that haven't been answered. We need to know, does Tiny Tim survive? Is it good enough? And we see, actually, yes, it is. And Scrooge acts as a second father for him. So Scrooge has literally saved someone's life. He's not just been kind, he's saved someone's life. Tiny Tim kind of represents the entire novella, I think. He's absolutely symbolic of it, that he is this person in need who absolutely does not deserve to have any kind of negative part of their life. He's not deserved any of the things that have happened to him. It just happens to be that way. That he was born into a losing struggle, he was born into poverty, etc., etc. And that people who have the ability to help should help. And that the result is that those people get to carry on living and get to kind of have the life that they deserve as human beings. Now, it then talks about also that some people kind of laughed at Scrooge in the street. They didn't really understand what was going on, and they found it a bit weird that he was so happy suddenly. But it doesn't bother him. Talks down here, look, his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. That, he does it to make himself feel good, but also others, and he's not bothered about the way that he will be judged. And it's as if his heart, almost like his soul, is laughing with him. Yeah, it personifies that no longer was he covetous and always greedy, but actually just his heart being happy was enough for him. Things are good because they're good. They're not good because someone says they're good. Just do good things because they are good things to do. It's kind of the point of that one, I would think. Last paragraph. He says he had no further intercourse with spirits. So he had no further conversation, no kind of dealings with them anymore. And it says he lived on the total abstinence principle. Now, total abstinence principle is not a real thing. It's just something that Dickens has made up, but he's made it into a proper noun. So it's as if this thing of something we should all implore and all kind of have as part of our lives, that we're going to be abstinent, we're going to completely give up bitterness and greed and being horrible to people, etc., etc., and being horrible to people. And then it ends on Tiny Tim, and again, I think, who is very kind of holistically representative of this novella. As Tiny Tim observed, God bless us everyone. And this kind of idea that everyone is equal, everyone should be allowed to have everything that everyone else has, and everyone deserves to be happy, healthy, and comfortable. And that we should all help each other until that's the case. And as well, I think that kind of references the summary that we saw from Scrooge in Stave 4, talking about how, men's actions will foreshadow their own demise unless they change it. And this is kind of the summative point of that. Can I say as well, well done, because I've seen a lot of your notes, and obviously I know not everyone watching this will be part of my class, but from what I've seen, people have been absolutely bossing this, and the amount of notes and detail and the discussions that we've had about it have been brilliant. So a huge well done on that. And there we go. You can add another novella to your read list. All right. So any questions, do let me know. I won't see you soon because we're done. Interesting. Stay safe. Bye.